Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, I thought that I would talk about some recent news that was recently released just a little bit ago. So, Daniel Dubois, who still is an up and coming British heavyweight, who unfortunately for him lost his last fight against another up and coming British heavyweight by the name of Joe Joyce. He will be making his ring return, I believe, on June 5th with an opponent by the name of, I believe, Bogdan Dinu. For those of you that don't know who Bogdan Dinu is a Romanian fighter, I believe. His record is 20-2. And the two losses that he does have, I believe, are against top contenders. One being over Jarrell Big Baby Miller, when Jarrell Big Baby Miller was still one of the top heavyweights in the world, and the other one being Kubrat Pulev, who you could debate as one of the top 10 heavyweights in the world right now, or one of the top 15 heavyweights in the world right now, but he's around that area. So let's talk about Danny Dubois. Let's talk about overall. What are his chances of winning this fight or losing this fight? Do I think that this is a good fight for him to come back to? And on top of that, how do I think he should look in this fight? What changes do I think that he should make? And when it comes down to it, will he eventually be a top 10 heavyweight in the world? So we're going to answer all those questions right here now. So anyways, just to get into it, first of all, do I think that this is a good fight for Daniel Dubois to take right now? I think that this is pretty much the best fight that he could possibly take. I don't think Dinu is obviously an A-grade fighter. I don't think that he's even a B-grade fighter. I think that he is a C-class fighter. But when it comes down to it, what I've seen from Dinu at least is that he at least is going to try and give you your money's worth, basically. He seems to be a decently tough fighter. He doesn't have the worst power in the world. When I take a look at it, Dinu seems like he possibly could give Daniel Dubois at least a little bit of a fight. I seen him in the Kubrat Pulev fight. He was somewhat competitive in the first half of that fight, and then Kubrat Pulev kind of broke him down in the second half of that fight. But Dinu, in a couple of moments in that fight, excuse me, against Kubrat Pulev, had Pulev backing up. He might have even had him, a little bit hurt. And he also had him cut in that fight when it came down to it, Dinu did. So Dinu is not a complete slouch. Now, once again, I see him as a C-class fighter, but he is a competitive C-class fighter. He is a C-class fighter that could be potentially dangerous if you don't take him seriously. So Daniel Dubois, I do think, needs to take this fight seriously, and I think he will, because why wouldn't you take your next fight seriously after you just recently lost your last fight to Joe Joyce? So I think Daniel Dubois is probably going to be very hungry to get back in there and to prove to the world that he still has a lot of upside in his career. Now, what do I think I need to see from Daniel Dubois? First of all, what are my regular expectations for this fight? And what I mean by that is, what are my realistic expectations for this fight? What do I think is going to happen in this fight? What would my early on prediction be? I would say that most likely Daniel Dubois is going to win this fight. I think that he probably has about at least a 80 to 90% chance of winning this fight at least. Dinu, maybe he has a slight chance, but when it comes down to it, I just don't see him having the skill set or the potential that a Daniel Dubois has. But when it comes down to it, what I will say is this. I think that the expectations for me, the realistic expectations, are that I think Dinu is going to give Daniel Dubois actually some problems, maybe within the first 2 to 4 rounds. I think that's what's going to happen. But I think most likely eventually Daniel Dubois will be able to outstrike him. I think that eventually he's going to be able to outpower him and basically just outmuscle him. I think that he's eventually going to probably knock him out at about round 8, round 9, something like that. That's what should happen. Those are my realistic expectations. That's what my early on prediction would be. But when it comes to my high expectations on what I think Daniel Dubois should do, what he needs to do for me in order for me to think that he's a little bit more improved, I need to see Daniel Dubois be completely dominant in this fight. I would love to see him win almost every round in this fight. This is a fighter that's gave Kubrat Pulev, one of the top heavyweights in the world right now, a very tough fight, at least in the first half of that fight. I didn't watch the one that he lost to against Jarrell Big Baby Miller, but I would have to watch that one. But the little research that I have done on Dinu, he gave some decent heavyweights a tough fight, at least within a part of that fight. If Daniel Dubois could look somewhat dominant against Dinu, and let's say Dinu doesn't even win one round in that fight, and let's say even if he gets stopped early in this fight, I think that that's a great statement. Now, do I believe that Daniel Dubois will do that? I think most likely it's going to be a later on stoppage, and I think most likely when I take a look at the skill set of Daniel Dubois, because I do think he has a certain amount of holes in his game, I think Dinu most likely is going to give him a little bit more trouble than what people predict, but we'll see what happens. But let's talk about the upside of Daniel Dubois' career now. Let's talk about overall where I think he's going to go in his career, what changes I think he needs to make, and will he eventually become a top 10 heavyweight in the world? Well, and a certain amount of people may not believe me on this, but you can go ahead and check me on this if you want to. When his last fight against Joe Joyce happened, and if you go down here, I believe it happened on November 28th, 2020. So obviously not too long ago. But when it comes down to it, I actually predicted Joe Joyce to win that fight. And I think Joe Joyce was the underdog in that fight because there were so many people saying that Daniel Dubois had this upside and that he's so athletically gifted and that he's the most powerful puncher in the division. And there was just a bunch of people that really were on the hype train with Daniel Dubois. And I think that, he deserved a little bit of that hype. But obviously, the brakes need to be pumped a little bit when it comes to Daniel Dubois because he was not very impressive in his last fight against Joe Joyce. I remember when I had my channel several years earlier, when my older channel, this is a little bit of a newer one, but I remember when I had an older channel, I used to talk about Anthony Joshua quite a bit. I used to actually say that Anthony Joshua very much impressed me, and I thought that Anthony Joshua would eventually become the number one heavyweight in the world. And when it comes to these fighters, at least when it comes to their talent level, I usually like to think, at least for me, that I know what I'm watching. When it comes to a Daniel Dubois, excuse me, when it came to an Anthony Joshua, I believe that one day he could eventually become the number one heavyweight in the world. And you can argue that he is debatably the number one heavyweight in the world right now. Personally, I would say that it's Tyson Fury. But when it comes down to it, Anthony Joshua is at least very close to that. At one point in time, you would at least have to say that he was the number one heavyweight in the world. So I was at least somewhat in the ballpark with Anthony Joshua. And I was also somewhat right about Daniel Dubois, because when I took a look at him, I was not overtly impressed with some of the things that I saw. I did not think that he was really that great defensively. I thought that he was defensively irresponsible. I don't think that he had the greatest head movement. And when it came down to it, I thought that he lacked a variety of attacks, and I thought that he lacked more than a plan A. Those are all the faults that I've seen in Daniel Dubois, and all those faults showed up in the Joe Joyce fight. And a lot of people favorite Daniel Dubois over Joe Joyce, and it's understandable because if you take a look at it, just on the surface, it looks like Joe Joyce is not the fighter that Daniel Dubois is. But if you were to take a look more into it, Joe Joyce actually has more of a skill set than Daniel Dubois. And a certain amount of people, well, once upon a time, I'm sure they would have disagreed, but you kind of have to you have to kind of agree now because Joe Joyce ended up not just winning over Daniel Dubois, he ended up knocking him out. And there's a reason for that. Joe Joyce also has very decent power for a heavyweight. I don't think that he has the same power that, say, an Anthony Joshua does or a Deontay Wilder, obviously, but he has decent power. And when it came to Daniel Dubois, a certain amount of things got exposed in him in that fight. He didn't avoid the jab very well. That really is the punch that killed him in that fight. And let me also tell you this. A certain amount of people might grill Daniel Dubois for taking a knee and quitting that fight. I can't criticize him to a great degree for that because he had a very hurt eye. I'm not going to go on him too much for that. If you're hurt, you're hurt. You know when the fight is probably out of your reach. So I'm not going to criticize him for that. I'm not the one in the ring. If you have, then there's a possibility he might have had a broken orbital eye bone. So, of course you don't want to be fighting with that. I've seen some of the toughest fighters like Alfredo Ngulu quit because they had a broken orbital eye bone. For a certain amount of people that don't remember, one of my favorite fighters to watch, Arislani Lara, in that fight against Alfredo Ngulu in a very competitive fight. Alfredo Ngulu actually quit, I believe, in the 10th round because Lara broke his orbital eye bone. So that's an injury that you don't want to mess around with. But when it comes down to it, man, I think Daniel Dubois, when I took a look at him on the come up, and when I took a look at Anthony Joshua on the come up, I look at them as two completely different fighters. I remember when Anthony Joshua was on the come up, I had a certain amount of people agreeing with what I was saying about Anthony Joshua. That I think he's very talented. But I also had a certain amount of people telling me that, oh, you're wrong. He's just a pure straight up and down fighter. He's very robotic. He's one dimensional. Blah 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 blah. I had all these people telling me this about Anthony Joshua. Well, Anthony Joshua certainly has holes in his game, just like a lot of people do. But when it comes down to it, I've seen more upside from Anthony Joshua's first fight than I have ever seen from Daniel Dubois in any of his fights. And a certain amount of people would disagree with that. It's not that I'm not rooting for Daniel Dubois. It's not that I think that he does not have upside potential. I think that he is an incredible athlete. I think that he has decent athletic ability. But when I take a look at that skill set, I just don't see an A-grade skill set. I don't see elite movement. I don't see elite footwork. I don't see elite defensive ability. I also don't see elite ability to take punishment. That's also another problem. I don't personally. He's going to have to look very impressive in this fight for me. This actually, in my opinion, is a very great fight for Daniel Dubois to take next, because Dinu, he's a C-class fighter once again, but he can be a competitive C-class fighter. He doesn't have the worst power in the world. For Daniel Dubois to really suffer that crushing defeat to Joe Joyce in a fight that maybe he could have been winning on the scorecards. I know for sure the judges had him ahead, but when we take a look at it logically and objectively, that really was a swing fight. You really could argue who is ahead on the scorecards. But when it comes down to it, that had to be a crushing loss. And the way that he lost had to be a crushing loss. So when it comes down to it, Daniel Dubois, in my opinion, is going to have to make some major changes. Major changes. I need to see better head movement. I need to see better footwork. I need to see better defense, especially defense. I can't see him, repeatedly taking jabs and repeatedly taking a right hand overall from Dino. I need to see some movement in this fight. I need to see more variety of attacks. All right, I need to see all of that. Better counter-punching ability. When I take a look at Daniel Dubois, and this is just what I'm going to say, and a certain amount of people are not going to agree, I do not think that he personally has an A-grade skill set. I think that he has A-grade athletic ability. But when I take a look at his skill set, I do not believe that he has an A-grade skill set. I never believed that he had an A-grade skill set because I predicted Joe Joyce to beat him. You can take a look at that in my old video. Of course, it's from quite a while ago because the fight happened a while ago. But when it comes down to it, you can go ahead and take a look at my prediction for that. So it is what it is. But when I take a look at it, I do hope that Daniel Dubois has a great upside. I do hope that Daniel Dubois improves in his career. I do hope that Daniel Dubois improves in this fight. I'm really hoping to see improvement. Now, I heard from some people that maybe he changed his corner. I'm not sure how true that is. So if one of you guys can let me know on that, let me know. But what I'll say is this. Daniel Dubois needs to make some major improvements because as of right now, in my opinion, would he make the top 10 heavyweights in the world? I think there's a potential that maybe, just maybe, he could defeat some of them. I think if he maybe caught, some of the lower tier ones, maybe the ones that are up there in age, or maybe the ones overall that seem to, I'm trying to think of how to put this. Maybe overall, maybe the ones that are up there a little bit in age, or overall just usually have one type of attack, maybe like a Luis Ortiz or Joseph Parker. I think maybe, but to be honest with you, I don't know if I even see him beating any of those fighters. And on my channel, and I've said this repeatedly, and a certain amount of people have not agreed with me, I've never been overly impressed with like a fighter like Joseph Parker. And I think Joseph Parker, I think that he is, I'm trying to think of who I would rank for my top heavyweights in the world. Number 1, I'd have Tyson Fury. Number 2, Anthony Joshua. Number 3, Deontay Wilder. Number 4, either Andrew Ruiz or Dillian White. So that's top 5. Number 6, I may have Alexander Povetkin. Number 7 would either be Luis Ortiz or Joseph Parker. So Joseph Parker is around 7. He's around 7. So when it comes down to it, he's still pretty high rank. I don't know if Daniel Dubois, when I take a look at him right now, I don't know if he would beat any of those fighters, man. I don't know if he would beat any of those fighters. And to be honest with you, I would like to see him in a fight with Kubrat Pulev. I'm not even sure if he would defeat Kubrat Pulev. Now, maybe Joe Joyce just has a better upside than what we all thought, than what I think. But when I take a look at Joe Joyce, I think would have a tough time with some of those fighters as well. When I take a look at Joe Joyce, I don't know if there's a decent chance that he beats Joseph Parker or Dillian White or some of these other fighters. I think that those actually would be, I think those would be close fights. But there's a potential that those fighters beat Joe Joyce. It is what it is. Now, of course, that's a little bit of fight math. We don't always want to go by that. But my point being is this. I don't see Daniel Dubois, as of right now, having an A-grade skill set. I need to see some major improvements. So if you were going to ask me right now, do I see Daniel Dubois eventually making the top 10? I need to see some major improvements. I need to see some major improvements, not just some minor changes. I need to see some major improvements. I need to see better defense. I need to see better head movement, especially. I need to see better footwork. I need to see more variety of attack. I need to see all those things because that was the reason why I really predicted Joe Joyce over him. Because if you saw what both of them had, you knew that Joe Joyce was a little bit faster on his feet, and that Joe Joyce, when it came down to it, actually moved his head better and was more defensively responsible than Daniel Dubois. Right? It was just going to depend how great technically Joe Joyce was, and Joe Joyce, in my opinion, is not a grade technical fighter. When you take a look at him, sometimes he can be a little bit sloppy with some of his punches or with some of his throwing, but he did enough to win that fight, and he didn't have to stop him. So we'll see what happens when it comes down to it. I'm very intrigued by this next fight. I'm very excited to see it because I am cheering for Daniel Dubois. I hope that he has this great upside. Personally, do I ever see him becoming the best heavyweight in the world like a Tyson Fury or an Anthony Joshua, or at least on that level? No. But when it comes down to it, hopefully Daniel Dubois can at least become in that top 10 range with the Joseph Parkers, with the Dillian Whites, with the Andrew Ruiz Jr.'s, with the Luis Ortiz's, with those fighters, with the Alexander Povetkin's, whoever else you want to mention. Hopefully he becomes in that top 10. Now, excuse me, if Daniel Dubois were able to win this fight dominantly, like my high expectations hope for, I think a great fight for him next would actually be a Charles Martin. I think that would be a fantastic fight. And if Daniel Dubois looks fantastic in this fight, I would favor him against Charles Martin. To be honest with you, I still might favor him over Charles Martin anyway, because Charles Martin really ain't, he's not really that good. But he's a decent fighter. A great fight next if you were able to beat this Romanian fighter by a pretty decent amount, or we're able to knock him out, or we're able to look completely dominant against him. A great fight, in my opinion, next would be a Charles Martin. I would love to see that. Then later on down the line, who knows, maybe a rematch against Joe Joyce. Who knows? But when it comes down to it, as of right now, I think that's what Daniel Dubois needs to do. I think that he will win this fight. I think that hopefully for him, he looks more improved in this fight. Hopefully we see better head movement. Hopefully we see more defensive responsibility. I'm hoping that we see that, but we'll see what happens. Anyways, that's really about it for today. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think on Daniel Dubois in his next fight. Do you think that eventually he will become a top 10 fighter in the world? What do you see out of him? And that's really all I have to say on this matter. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to y'all later.